So today we are doing dignity, and this will follow our usual pattern where the way I try to arrange these ideas is first to present the human experience of dignity or autonomy or fairness and so on. And that's what we do at the case study at the start. And then the second thing that we do is we try to put a formal definition onto the ideas that we're discussing, in this case, dignity. And then from there, we investigate some of the dilemmas and debates that surround and applications that surround this particular ethical idea. So that's the structure of the way that the seminar sessions work. And we'll just dive right into here. This is, and now it feels very old now, right? A case study from 2014, so that's a decade old. But this is an important study because it is one of the first where we have, and one of the only actually, where we have real data showing the way a real social media company, in this case it's an online dating company like Tinder and so on, it's called Cupid. We have real data showing the results of their studies, and more importantly, we know exactly what at least some of their studies were. So we have this in the from the OkCupid blog. Again, it's from obviously July 28th, 2014. We noticed recently that people didn't like it when Facebook experimented with their news feed. Later on at the end, I will just give you the details of that, but let's stick with this case for the moment. Even the Federal Trade Commission is getting involved, but guess what? Everybody, if you use the internet, you're the subject of hundreds of experiments at any given time on every site. That's how websites work. Here are the few of the more interesting experiments that OkCupid has run. So great, we're going to see some of their experiments. And again, as I say, what's important about this is they just admitted what they were. I'm not sure admitted is the right word even. I would say that they just reported what they were doing. And so that makes this case very unique. Most other websites were more discreet, are more discreet. And today, no one reports anything if they can avoid it. So this is the person, the lead at OkCupid in offices that look like they're probably look very much like downtown New York City, or maybe someplace in San Francisco that's trying to pretend like it's New York City. His name is Christian Rudder. There he is. There is his offices. Somehow these offices always look empty, right? I'm not sure where the workers are. This is from obviously way before COVID, but somehow these companies all have offices with no one there, and they always look like they have stuff hanging out everywhere. But they do generate websites that work, and OkCupid works. And here's one of their experiments. So this is what they were doing. They were trying to find out a few things. One, they were trying to determine whether or not their recommendations, that is when they said person A and person B are a good match, whether or not that was actually true. The chances that person A and person B were a good match were better than the chances that just random person A and random person B are a good match. So that was one thing they were trying to discover. But they also cleverly thought that, well, you know what? It might be that when we say that person A and person B are a good match, they do perform as a couple better than just a random set of matches. But it could be, the reason for this could be that they've been told they're a good match, right? I mean, this happens all the time. This happens in medicine. It's the placebo effect, right? If you take a drug and the doctor says, this drug will take away your headache, studies show that even if the pill is just a sugar pill, that in some significant percentage of cases, the patients will say, look, the drug worked. My headache is gone. So there is this placebo effect in medicine. And what the OkCupid experiment tries to flesh out is whether or not that placebo effect is also working here on their platform. So they decided to do the following experiment and then measure the results in terms of, as I say, successful coupling. And then how do they measure whether or not a couple was successfully matched? I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was something to the effect of they exchanged something like 5 or more messages subsequently, right? And because that's what the dating site tries to do, right? I mean, it doesn't really promise. It's pretty hard to get them to promise full-on wedding and that kind of thing, even though some talk about that these days. And really what they try and do is they say, we can give you a match that's good enough, so at least you kind of have a start, right? You at least can exchange a few messages. So that's the criteria that they used. They said, look, if we put people together and they start exchanging messages and they exchange, I'm not sure what it is, more than 5 messages over the course of more than 2 days, then we will consider that the machine has worked. And if they don't do that, then it fails, right? So that's how they measured success and failure. And then with that as the background, this is what the experiment did. It's a little bit, well, at least for me, it's a little bit difficult to kind of decode it from the results here. But if you kind of look at it long enough, it does make sense. What they did is they said that their system displays to users. So let's say there's me and Jane Jones, right? The system would display to Jane Jones and I, both of us, that the system finds she and I to be a 90% match, which is good, or a 60% match, which is mediocre, or a 30% match, which actually is not very good according to their system. I guess there's no 0% match for OkCupid. So there's 30, 60, and 90, and Jane and James both see the 90, in which case hopefully we try to connect. If we see the 30, we maybe don't try to connect, but at least sometimes people say, who cares about the numbers? I like the way Jane looks, and I try to connect with her, and she agrees and tries to connect with me, and so on. So they do get, OkCupid does get data from their people that they match at 90%, 60%, and 30%. They can actually see how that works. And then if you just look at the matches, so and you put 30% match as the number displayed to them, and the 30% match, the success rate is 10%, which is really not very good. If the number displayed is 60% and the actual compatibility is 60%, the success rate is 13%. So it does go up a little bit. And then if the match number displayed to them is 90% and their actual compatibility is 90%, then there's a 20% chance that they will exchange this numbers of messages. So, but you notice a few things. First, the success rate of the machine is not very high, no matter what. But it is true. I mean, if you trust their numbers, and they seem fairly straightforward, it does appear to be the case that their matching system does provide some little boost. If your match number is high, the chance that you will end up exchanging messages does increase a little bit. So great. That's the baseline. But the experiment is they said, okay, let's start with that baseline, but then let's find out how much of this effect might be that kind of placebo effect by mixing up the numbers that we show to different people. That is, let's take people who are 90% compatible, that's 90% match, and let's show them let's show them or tell them that they're 60% compatible. So if they're actually 90% compatible and they're told they're 60% compatible, then their let's say their unity score, right, their romance success score drops from 20 to 17. And then if they're truly 90% compatible and they're told that they're only 30% compatible, then their success score drops down to 16. And okay, so that sort of makes sense, right? If people are actually compatible, then when they're told they're not compatible, they have a less positive attitude about the whole thing. And there is a slight decrease in how well the machine works. So that's one result. The other result is, I think, a little bit more interesting. It's, well, what happens when they're actually only 30% compatible, right? Which is not very compatible according to OkCupid. And when they're told they're 30% compatible, only 10% of the time do they break through and get together. But when they're told they're 60% compatible, mediocre, there's a pretty good jump, right? They go up from 10% to 16%, making a good match. And then when they're told they're a really good match, 90% compatible, well, then they jump up to 17%. So you can see there is, according to their data, there is a placebo effect, or as he says here, the mere myth of compatibility works just as well as the truth. And the numbers he's referring to there are the 17 and the 16 that are circled, because if you're really a good match, according to their data, if you're really a good match and you're told you're not a good match, then you have a 60% chance of getting together. And if you're not a good match, but you're told you are a good match, then you have a 17% chance of getting together. So the result of all this is that they can verify to some extent, validate maybe is a better word, not verify the absolute truth, but give some foundation for their claims, that the machine does in fact locate and facilitate romantic connections. But they also show that part of what's going on there, in fact, must be the added effect, the placebo effect, that people are being told they're good matches. You can see on the 30% level that there is a positive, a 7% effect. It's positive for the additional 7%. That's positive for the placebo effect. So, again, as he concludes, the mere myth of compatibility works just as well as the truth. That's kind of an interesting finding, right? I'm not clear if you're better off being a bad match who's told they're good or being a good match who's told they're bad. It's about the same. Everyone agrees. The best thing is to be a good match and told that. So they did that, and they published this on their blog so everyone can see it, could see it. And I think it's very much kind of, I think that is a little bit of a Silicon Valley mentality, right? This idea we're doing these experiments and experiments are fundamentally good. And so everyone will want to know about this and it's great and everything. But what they found out when they published that is that not everyone thinks like a Silicon Valley CEO of a dating company. And people got pretty upset. And here are two, I just took two reactions in the blog. It's worth going to. It's now no longer live online, but if you use the Wayback Machine, you can actually find it. You can look up I'll show it to you again here. If you use the Wayback Machine on the internet and go check OkCupid for sometime after July 28th, 2014, you will be able to find this. And there's other experiments. It's very interesting. It's worth looking at, I think. But in any case, the one we're going to look at in this class is the myth of compatibility. And there were, as you can imagine, a lot of reactions to this experiment. And I just chose two of them, which are fairly representative of the larger set. And so one person says, very reasonably, it's good to know at any one time here forward I can trust or distrust your match numbers, not knowing if your lab experiment is resurfaced, right? I mean, it's almost astonishingly blind on the part of the CEO to not realize, well, wait a minute, my users are now going to be ruined. They're going to think, well, this is always just some crazy experiment, and no one's going to accept the placebo effect anymore. But he didn't think that, and just published the results. Then another person Anand says, what if the manipulation is used for what you believe does good for the person? That is what I'm forced to believe is the reason people end up manipulating people for good or money in their own heart. And what I want to show about this, the reason I selected these two is because I think the first one is kind of the that seems to me that would be the standard reaction. I sign up to for this dating site in order to have better chances of meeting Jane, who's good for me, instead of Joan, who's not good for me, and so on. And if you're going to just be messing up the numbers, well, why am I even here? Why am I paying my money to be on the site? It makes no sense. Right? So there's that one reaction, the sensible reaction. But then there's a good point that I think is implicit in what Anand says. And that's the idea that, well, if he's doing these experiments, then he's probably doing it. And in fact, this is what he says if you read the blog. Right? The reason he does these experiments is to try to find out how well the machine works and hopefully to improve the machine. That's why he wanted to do it. And he says this directly too. And it seems to me that makes a lot of sense too, right? Maybe he did have some intellectual curiosity about things, but it's also true, as the owner of the company, he wants the machine to work well. And he's in a kind of a hard place because if you want to improve your machine, you really do, well, you don't really, you do absolutely, you need data. You need to see, well, what works and what doesn't. If you can't measure something, you can't improve it. And in order to measure how well the machine works, right, you need to get some kind of neutral case, right? You need to do something sort of like he did. You have to say, look, let's test what happens when not only I tell people they're a 90% match and they are a 90% match, let's test what happens in maybe it's not a neutral case, but a negative case where they're not a good match and I tell them they are. Otherwise, we don't know if the machine works. And only from there can we perhaps help to improve the machine or change the weightings of the various factors we use to determine what counts as a good match and so on. So the CEO is in a difficult position. On the one hand, of course, he doesn't want reactions like the first one. He doesn't want people saying, why am I using your platform? On the other, kind of like Anand says, he needs to do something to make it better, to improve the machine. So what I want to bring this all around to is what kind of objection you might have to being part of this experiment. And it seems to me that there are two kinds of objections. There's one objection, and that's the first one, the obvious one, which is, well, I'm really mad because I'm paying to get matched and I'm not getting matched. That makes a lot of sense. But it's also true practically, and as I just tried to say, it's also true practically that you can't expect the machine to work or to improve if they don't once in a while do tests to see how well it's working. So I think that to a degree cancels out to a degree, not entirely, but to a degree cancels out the objection of the first person. But then in the second person, he is manipulating people. I really like this last line, end up manipulating people for money or good in their own heart. If we get rid of the money and say that Cupid is manipulating people for good in their own heart, it's still, this is the key point, it's still manipulation. So the users of OkCupid are being manipulated, right? They're being used in these experiments like lab animals. They're being treated like tools, right? Things that I remember your dissection classes in biology, right? People are being treated as tools. Their romantic desires and interests and fears and so on are being dissected by this platform. But they're being dissected maybe with good in their heart. That is, OkCupid is doing it for the good reason that they want the platform to succeed and they want people to find matches. So what I want to say is dignity is that kind of objection you have, that feeling of being manipulated or that objection to being manipulated that exists, even if, or even when you accept that the manipulation might be necessary, and you accept even perhaps that the manipulation is done for your own good. That's the point I really want to bring out, right? You can see in here, within this raw and understandable reaction that people have, like I'm being treated as a thing, I'm being manipulated, exploited by these Silicon Valley CEOs. It's very reasonable to have that human reaction, but that human reaction can be divided into two parts. The one part is this sort of practical side, which maybe you can cancel out and explain away. And then the other side that's left, that's the dignity side. That's the side that says, look, even though it's for my own good and it will help me, I still don't like being treated as a tool in your experiment, as a lab rat. So something like that, I think, is the experience of dignity. That's the way it can be described. How can it be measured? We'll have to look at that as we go further. But the first step is always to try and get the human experience of what autonomy means or what dignity means. And I think that this brings out pretty clearly what the human experience is of dignity. And then that just brings up just a thought that I had. Well, I mean, if there is an objection to people using these clients of OkCupid for their experiments in the dating site, is there also an objection to people like me using, I'm using APB 101 and on. I'm using these people as experiments in my class, right? Is there any difference between those two things? Am I exploiting those people in the same way or in a similar way with respect to dignity as they were exploited in the OkCupid experiment? I'm not sure. It seems to me like it's a close case. I am, in fact, treating these people as sort of tools. I'm manipulating them. I'm cutting out part of what they said and manipulating it and using it for my own experiment, which is not a romantic dating site. Instead, it's a philosophy and ethics seminar. But same thing. I'm taking them out and using them for my purposes. Maybe I could say something like, look, at least I'm protecting their anonymity. I think that makes a difference. But there is something there too, that in a certain sense, I'm exploiting them for my own purposes and my own projects. So that's the experience of human dignity, and the experience of having that dignity to an extent taken away from you or stripped away.